today. This is a very special occasion where we are taping a segment of the California welfare history related to children, in particular immigrant children in California. I'm Esther Gillies, the president of the California Social Welfare Archives, and I will be talking with you today about the history of the program that was developed by DCFS, at the time DPSS, to deal with issues related to immigrant children, particularly from Mexico, in the early 1970s. And with us today is Carlos Sosa,
Good morning.
a longtime employee and manager and administrator and bureau chief in DCFS, DPSS, and Gladys Brito, who was instrumental in the implementation of this program as it emerged in the 1970s. So with that, Carlos, could you tell us a little bit about the program itself? What caused the concern?
Well, there have always been undocumented children here, and there have always been undocumented children in the child welfare part of LA County, under child protection or foster care. Right? So back in 1976 or thereabouts, Judge Skip Byrne, who was a presiding judge of the juvenile court in LA County, called his office called me and he wanted to meet. And what the issue was that he had a case before him in which there was an undocumented child, I think it was like a 7 or 8 year old, whose family was in Mexico, and this child was here and had been abused. So what he wanted to know was, how do we get this child back to Mexico? That was the question. And what he related also was that it may be in the next courtroom next to his, there may be a similar case in which the judge or the county council or the panel attorney were saying, no, you can't return him or can't return the child back to Mexico because we don't know where or how they're going to be treated. Mm-hmm. So there was no system. There wasn't any. So what he asked me to come up with some suggestions, and he asked the county council to assign somebody to work with me to look at the legal issues. Unfortunately, it was somebody who was not Mexican, didn't speak Spanish, because what we had to do at first was to learn, how does Mexico do child welfare? So after, we had no internet at that time, so it was a lot of word of mouth and hearsay and things like that. So what we decided to do, well, what I decided to do at that time was to get Gladys, who spoke Spanish well, was a line social worker, to help me, and we had a case aide also who understood the political protocols in Mexico, because her family had been involved in those things in the past, to set up a meeting in Tijuana with the Mexican authorities to understand what we were supposed to do. Okay? So they were very cordial and very accepting of setting up this meeting, and we went down there, and we didn't understand exactly everything that was going on, because one of the things that happened, just as an anecdote, was that while we were in the meeting, the mayor's wife, who was the titular head of the child welfare agency, which was called the DIF, Desarrollo Integral Familiar, integral families, that's where they saw it. She showed up, to say hi to us, as we were from California, and she brought the press. And that was very customary. We weren't sure what the heck we were doing, why we were being interviewed by the press, but that's what it was. Okay. So they gave us a tour of some other facilities, and they had a different way of looking at child welfare. But one of the things they were very willing to do was to cooperate with us in how we return children to Mexican families, back to their Mexican families. Now Mexico has, 35, 40 states. Each state has an office. It's really a federal program, but each state has an office. The governor or the governor's wife is really the titular head of the system, but they did have civil servants who actually did the work. Most of them were lawyers, and some of them carried a badge, so they had a lot more authority than we did. Anyway, to make a long story short, what happened was that we understood the system and we said, this is what we need, and we wanted them to find a way to, the key was a home study. Right?
Yes.
That was a home study.
That was the home study.
If we decide, if the court decided to transfer a child back to his family,
Yes.
how can we get a home study to ensure that the family was okay? Now, the model, Esther, was that it was the same as we did when we returned a child from California to, say, Missouri. Missouri, remember, it was called the Interstate Compact at that time. And Missouri would do a home study of the family, they were relatives, send us a letter saying they're a wonderful family, or don't send the child over. But if we agreed to send the child over, then they assumed jurisdiction. So we use that same paradigm for us. We wanted a home study that we could present to the court and say, this is a wonderful family, and here's a proof from their child welfare agency.
Right.
So that was the gist. So we started working with that, but that necessitated another meeting in Tijuana when they had some officials from Mexico City come. Because they wanted to know, what is all this about?
Yeah.
Why is Los Angeles
Kind
County
doing this.
trying to do this? Was it an anti-immigrant issue or what? Or a money issue or whatever? So we had to,
Was there a concern that it was a state taking this action as opposed to the federal government working with
absolutely,
Mexico?
absolutely. Because states normally don't have foreign relations, But after a while, this was what we sold it as a child welfare issue. It was not a political, it was not a money, it was not a treaty. How do we get these children back to their
It
families?
was to do with her family. How do we get this kid back to the family in a safe way?
Yeah, so that was the issue. So they were very cooperative, and they came up. We went down to Tijuana again, invited them to come up, so they did, and we took them to lunch, the usual protocols, and we started doing this. And they sent out a bulletin to the major state offices, like Tijuana and
Mexicali.
Yeah, Mexicali, Juarez, Chihuahua, Guadalajara had a very good child welfare system, family system.
Yeah.
And several other states. So they sent out a bulletin saying, hey, this is, we're working on this and this is going to happen. So we trotted back to LA, met with the judge, developed our system, so to speak. And what we did was we asked for those cases in which the plan was to return the child to the parents in Mexico, that they be centralized with Gladys, right?
Yes.
That Gladys
Yes.
would assume control over all
Those cases.
these
How
cases.
to do it.
And we weren't talking about thousands all at once.
No.
I think we may have had maybe 200 in the total system.
Right. At the time, identifying.
Yeah. So it wasn't like we had hundreds. So at any one point, she had a good caseload. And then we started, one of the issues that came out of it was to escort.
At the time, I remember the caseload were not, I think I had usually over 100 cases, but it averaged about 60
Yeah.
cases
Yeah,
per
that's
worker
correct. That's good. Yeah.
at that
About
time.
60.
And your caseload was about 100?
Yes, because I had
more or less.
Not all of the cases that I had were kids to be returned to Mexico. I had other cases because Spanish speaking at that time were not as today. I mean, we really didn't have that
Yeah, it wasn't as
pool.
pronounced.
Yeah.
The immigration issue was not as pronounced.
Yeah.
That's how we would handle.
And I
these
had
kids.
Pat Davis, which was a community
Yeah, and then the
worker.
community aid was assigned to her
Yeah.
to help her with all the paperwork and phone calls to Mexico and so forth. Some of the time was, who's going to escort these minors
Right.
back to Mexico?
Yes.
Because they didn't have the money to come up here and pick these kids up.
Right.
Nor did they didn't say it, but they may not have seen it as their responsibility. We were willing to transport. So did you go? on
I
any other-
did.
Oh yeah.
I did. I
Okay.
took the first kid back to Hermosillo, which is,
Oh, yeah.
I remember it was a little,
Uh-huh.
like a 2-year-old. And I took it back, and they waited for me at the airport,
Right.
and the Desarrollo Integral de la Familia representative, and then we went to the office, and then I went to the home of the child and met the family, and, make sure that everything was okay, and returned back to LA.
No difference to
It was-
when we did the
yeah.
interstate transfer.
Yeah.
And we had other
You
Spanish
have to have a
people.
court order
Yeah, we have-
telling that I was the person allowed to take this
Right.
child out of the country.
We had to
because-
show them that
yeah.
this was a court order
Right.
from the state of California.
Right.
And that we got it I don't remember, we got a receipt.
Right.
from them that we had transferred the child officially and they signed
Because
it.
you needed, otherwise, I'm taking any children from here back
Yeah.
to Mexico, so it had that court order.
And we had other.
Yeah.
Was
I'm
DIF
sorry.
always involved when you returned a child? Was there always an official agency
Right.
to agency?
Oh,
transfer?
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. That
Absolutely.
was,
We wouldn't do it
that was
otherwise.
Pat Davis and my contact. They gave us a contact through the Desarrollo Integral Familiar, which is DIF. So we would write to them, and then we'll write to us, and we'll make phone calls, and we had the process of knowing that this child was going to go there, and they were waiting for us, and we had all the required paperwork.
Yeah, yeah. It
Look
was,
at that.
and we had other people. Pat Davis took some children back. We had some volunteers.
Yes, I think
Who
from
spoke
that
Spanish.
we developed a pool of volunteers to be able,
Yeah, to be
because
able-
we didn't have the manpower to go back and forth with the children, so a pool
And,
of
and
volunteers.
DPSS, or the county, was willing to pay the airfare. So if it was a volunteer, it was just the airfare, and maybe a one night, depending where they were
Right,
going.
depending where they
Where
were
they
going.
stayed one
Yeah.
night, and some of them sometimes didn't quite work out, we had one where we transferred a child to Mexico City, but the communication didn't work very well, and the worker called and said, called us back and said, "Hey, there's nobody here to meet me." So we had to instruct them, well, you got to check into a hotel somewhere, make sure, blah blah blah, and then we got it straightened out the next morning. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's
Because at the beginning, it was Pat and myself who were taking it, and all the kids were with me, but then as the process expanded, then other workers who had children who had to be returned, they were also able to do that. That's the case
Yeah,
that
if we
Carmen
could have
was
used
talking.
some of the Spanish-speaking social workers
Yeah.
who had children that were to be returned,
Mm-hmm.
if they could travel,
Right.
that was good because the child already knew them.
The worker,
And the transfer could be traumatic
yeah.
or scary for, a 5-year-old,
Yeah.
6-year-old, that kind of thing. And it was gender
Yeah.
correct. I mean, men transferred men and women transferred the
Yeah.
little girls. So that worked out okay. That worked out pretty good.
So this was about 1976,
Yeah, we moved out
77, 78.
Yeah, 70 up to
Between
79 when I
yeah,
moved to employee
I think
relations.
between 76 and 79, all this happened.
Yeah, now we had some other issues because
Yeah.
it was the war in El Salvador. So there were refugees here, and we ran into the same thing. Of course, El Salvador didn't have a child welfare agency, so the Red Cross was and that was real. Where do they live? Well, it's they lived family lived way up in the hills, and we couldn't get a home study.
Yeah.
In Mexico, some of these families lived outside of the big rural areas. They lived in a rancho or somewhere, and it was hard to get a home study. Or we would get a one-page letter from the chief of police.
Right.
Remember that? Saying, "This is a wonderful family, thank you," that kind of stuff. So we ironed those things out, And some kids, we didn't return. We said, this is not
No,
appropriate. We
exactly.
couldn't send them
Yes.
back to we didn't know where. But to El Salvador, we had to, we didn't go,
No.
the county employees went, but we had volunteers to go. And there was, like I said, there was a civil war still going on. So that was added a different dimension. When one of our volunteers said, "Yeah, when I got to the hotel in San Salvador, you know, they told me, well, at night if you want, you can put the mattress on the window and get some, for any stray bullets, you know. We didn't send that many back to El Salvador.
No, but
there were some,
it began with Mexico,
yeah.
but then as Judge heard about the project and other cases came up, they might have been from El Salvador, Guatemala,
Somewhere there,
some of-
Honduras, Belize even.
Honduras. So it kind of
Yeah.
start opening up other countries who had the same need, but we were
Yeah.
not really,
We had no agreement
no
with those
agreement
countries,
with
but
them. So,
we were using the same protocol.
yeah. Yeah, and I think later on, I think we started the contact years later with Salvador, with the consulate of El Salvador and all the consulates.
Oh, yeah, I forgot the consulate here was very
right.
interested.
We-
I forgot about that.
Consulate of Mexico was also involved at the beginning, and then other consulates reaching out to how we can do the same with this other country.
We still had to
Yeah,
present a case for return
right.
to the court because some
Right.
judges were just adamant they were
Right.
not going to return this
Yeah.
child back to Mexico, where they, in their perspective, their view, the child was better off here than going back to poverty or some other in Mexico.
And
So
that
the-
somehow, I think, brought the issue, yes, but for how long they're going to be good in here if they don't have,
Well, that was
that was,
right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
The context,
yeah,
the social work context here was that we knew that foster families were buying green cards on the black market for some of their children because they had been in foster care for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and now when they aged out, all you had was an undocumented, an illegal alien, if you will, at the time, who was 18, who was an adult. Couldn't go to school, couldn't go to
Couldn't
work,
do
couldn't do
anything.
anything. So some of the families said, well, I can't send him out or send her out to nothing. You know, they've been here for, you know, they saw them as their own children, so they would buy green cards on the black market.
yeah.
You know, it's, I didn't know about
We learned.
we
somehow.
learned, somehow, yeah, we heard about it. But it was but that was the milieu of having
But
to deal with undocumented
yes,
children. Right?
that was the issue. How do we have a child for so many years in, in our care? Because actually our department took care of those children, and then suddenly they become 18, and now what? What do we do? Where do they go?
Let me ask you a question about your internal operation.
Okay.
You said this began, it was initiated by the court. What do we do with
Correct.
these children?
Correct.
But what kind of activity was required within the department to make this happen? Did you kind of have free reign? Or
Yes.
were there?
We had free reign because nobody else
Yeah.
was doing it. And people, after a while, saw me or Gladys or the others as the program.
Yes.
We were the program. And since nobody else was doing it, and the credibility wasn't, some other officers said, well, we have these kids. They said, well, send us the case. Maybe some were reluctant to send it, I don't know. But in any case, that we were seen in the Bureau of Social Services, right? That's what it was called. The
Yeah.
Bureau of Social Services at the time. Then we were the experts, and we were the project. We were the project.
And you got no resistance from your administration?
No.
Or the,
No.
None, and for two reasons. One, we had a court order, so we had to obey that. Secondly, some of these kids were in GRI. Now, GRI is a categorical funding stream for those children for which there is no federal participation in foster care. Okay, so it becomes then those children in foster care were funded, the activity were funded by the county in California, almost on a 50-50 ratio. So for the county, they said, hey, this is a money saver. This is a money saver. And California, they floundered around. They weren't sure what to do. The closest county that came to, and we gave them a lot of information, was Santa Clara,
Yeah.
who was more forward thinking. So we're much more forward thinking. I can't remember who the director was at the time, John Cullen maybe. But they were interested in how they do it, and how to do it, but they had a different relationship with their Mexican consulate up north in the Bay Area, but it wasn't a return program. It was just a information and permanency.
For me, who I was a worker, had no idea of all this
Yeah.
that Carlos is speaking of. The motivation was that I had the children, and I really wanted to do something for them that it will help them in the future. So even returning them home, or then later on helping Carlos in getting them the citizenship that they require to remain here. Now, I was an immigrant. And
So would I.
yes, but I had been here maybe, 10 years in this country, so I kind of relate to the fact that you needed to have a support system to continue, and if we didn't do that for the children, once they were gone, what was going to happen to them?
Yeah, we
So
failed.
we can, and Carlos really was, and I think he doesn't take credit, but he was really always someone who could see the family point and the social work piece of it and the administration piece of it. I think you need
Yeah.
to have that to be able to do this. You cannot
Yeah.
just be an administrator, because then it won't work. You have to have the other piece, the social work component, and I think he had that. And I think that made the project, and people knew that we were so,
Yeah, the foster parents were glad
I mean, we were
that we were
really trying to do something for the
for
family
these children and,
and
their
for the
family.
kids, and I think that people saw that and trusted Carlos in the administration to do it.
Like a lot of, when immigration would make raids, would sweep through the garment district or whatever, they would send the family, the adults back. The adults would sometimes, not all the time, would sometimes not tell them that they had children here,
Right,
because
exactly.
they didn't want to have to pay again to
bring it back.
to come back. But sometimes these children were left with neighbors, or they were left at the daycare, or they were left with relatives, and they said, "What do I do with these kids?" They had no legal, even to get them medical care, they had no authority. That's how we got some of those cases, and
I think they will wait for a period of time for the
Yeah,
family to come
yeah,
back,
yeah.
and then family could not make it, then they will have to contact the department and say, I have this child here who I don't know what to do, and that's
And other
how we
times,
got involved.
it required a lot of social work some of these kids, we had really way that had been practically raised here, didn't speak Spanish,
Right.
but the family was down south, and saying, I want my child back, And some of these kids were sort of reluctant. I mean, they went, but they were somewhat reluctant to go there, especially if they were in a good foster home. The material sides was interesting. The other part was we realized about children is that they don't know where they were born. So we tell them, where were you born? And in Mexico. Okay, all right. Where in Mexico? And they would give you a city. But it was like, and I tested my children out with this premise when I asked my son, where were you born? He says, well, I was born here in Los Angeles. Well, he wasn't. He was born in Monterey Park. It didn't work out. And I had another one who was born in Pasadena, at Huntington. So it didn't quite work out. So we had to then, if they said they were born in Guadalajara, right? Well, Guadalajara is like a big region. Like saying I was born in the Bay Area. So it took some time to, and sometimes they didn't want to say because they didn't, we were the authority, So we had to convince families, look, this is what we're looking for, and then it would work out sometimes. Sometimes we never found out. Now the court took a different advantage of this. A different view, and once they knew that we had this contacts, then they thought that we had authority to do a bunch of other things. They, well, I won't mention the judge because you would recognize him. He's off the bench now. He's retired, but But what happened was that on one occasion, for example, we had a monitored visit, right? No big deal. The court ordered a monitored visit. Well, during the monitored visit, mom takes the kid and takes off, goes to Mexicali. So we report back to the court. We have an abduction, so to speak, and the judge was incensed. But we have a court order. So, well, so I said, go get him, go get the child. So I met with the judge and I said, I can't do that. I have no authority to go into Mexico to bring the child back. And he said, well, I'm giving you a court order here. And I said, yeah. Anyway, my boss said, you better do what the judge said. So we sent somebody, a social supervisor actually, I don't remember who it was, a male. I said, go to Mexicali and to talk to the DIF, the child welfare, see what they can help you. And they did. They took him around because the child remembered, had told us about some stores or factory that was nearby. And Mexicali, not that, it's a big city, but not that big. So they took him around and see if they could locate the address. Well, they never did. But I said, another time they ordered us to go to Acapulco to bring this child back. And we said, this is kidnapping. We can't do that. Oh my God, I thought you guys had the authority. Well, limited, of course. And sometimes the Mexican authorities would say, you can't do that. We have our laws here, and we can't break our laws to help you. It was a big learning experience, to say the least. And that worked out well. I mean, it was good. We had people who wanted to go. We had our cases were a lot cleaner. We didn't return everybody. We didn't. The cost was mainly the airfare and maybe a per diem. Sometimes they stayed a night, and sometimes they didn't. They just catch a turnaround flight.
But I'm hearing you say that about 1979 or so, other issues began to emerge that made you rethink how you were managing or operating the program.
Correct.
Yes.
And
correct.
What was you have begun, Gladys, to identify the child who grows up here in care, and then is emancipated from the system, and is not a citizen, and the limitations that creates for the child.
Well,
That was one of the issues that emerged out of this, because then
one of the issues is, what do we do?
Yeah,
if
what
we
do we
don't
do?
send them back? What do we do?
Yeah.
And what we decided, in putting our heads together, talking to people, was that we would find a way to legalize these kids. How can we legalize these kids before they're emancipated? How can we do it? And we talked to CHIRLA, the Coalition for something immigrant rights.
Yeah, there was.
We talked to them,
Yeah.
and we talked to our own county council, who didn't know anything about the immigration. We talked to the immigration people here and so forth. And the immigration people were very cooperative because they also saw this as a humanitarian.
Yeah.
And we told them outright, I have to tell you, we told them outright, look, the INS people, you don't want to be in the Times. You don't want to be in the LA Times that you are not willing to do something for the sexually abused little girl. You don't want to do that. I mean, it was a soft threat, but they understood it. So they said, well, get a test case. And what their precision was that if we have an administrative judge, an immigration judge, they're all administrative judges. I think that's what Ralph Furtick was.
Yes.
Okay, so if you have an administrative judge say, yes, this child is not going back and should remain here as a permanent resident because of the circumstances, that would automatically generate a green card. Okay. And we'll use that as a precedent.
Right, that would be the
Right.
precedent.
We'll use that as a precedent. So we scoured through and got this.
Actually, I had the perfect case.
Yeah, perfect.
I had
Yeah,
the perfect case for that. When we were talking, and I said, Carlos, this teenager, she was 17
16.
and a half, 16 to 17 anyway.
Sorry, baby.
She had been in foster care most of her life. There was no relative in the United States. She was a great student. She had A's, and she was in a foster home who was very supportive, wanted to send her to college.
Went to Fairfax High.
It was just, there was nothing that child she was actually able to communicate. She was
Oh, yeah.
outgoing. I mean, she was assertive. She could talk and tell her story. So that was the case.
That was the case. We wrote
that
it
was
up.
the case.
Immigration gave us the forms. They set up a special hearing with this judge, and they warmed up the judge and said, this is what this is about. Blah, blah, blah. So it was pretty
Was a
much
good case.
The setup was
Yeah.
there. The setup was there, and we were very confident. Unfortunately, I don't know if you remember this part, but
Nope.
one of the immigrant advocacy groups, One Stop Immigration,
Oh, wow.
heard of what we were doing,
I don't
and they went to the hearing, and they gave a friend of the court kind of petition that
Amicus brief.
amicus curiae or something, whatever, that the judge should expand the petition that we had submitted to all immigrant children, including the runaways,
See, we didn't
that were
want-
coming
yeah.
in from El Salvador and other places
Yeah.
because of the war. They were all adolescent or young adults. And so the judge, this was a new, and we didn't anticipate it. We kept telling them, shush, but we lost. And Mike Walker had gone to them, was there at the hearing too. And so what happened was that the judge excused himself. He says, well, I need to talk to some people.
You mean after all this perfect work that we did?
Yeah. Yeah.
That piece, I have no
The
recollection of it.
the judge came back. The judge came back and said, I'm going to dismiss this petition. Oh, we just thought, this is awful. The child got legalized.
Yes, the
Got
child.
legalized
yes,
later through a
because-
different,
Yes. we
where this
did- we-
evolved into, so
Right,
we were
I remember that.
very, very disappointed, because
Oh,
we had our hearts, and the whole thing, a lot of things were riding on this case. And it was a good one. The child had been brought up here by friends,
Yeah.
and they were using her in their restaurant or something like that. And then they gave her up. And actually, they gave her up, I think, because her parents, who were still in Mexico, got wind that she wasn't going to school, that she was being used as a maid or a babysitter or something. And then they said, oh, we're going to get in trouble over this, so send her to child welfare.
Yeah, she did good in actually.
She was an
did-
excellent student. Excellent.
Because we didn't want to bring anyone who was a troublemaker, who was
Yeah,
not doing.
a
We wanted
delay.
to make sure that
No mental health
yeah,
issues.
that you have a kid that
Real
deserves
poster child.
and would be, available to become a citizen and be productive in this country.
Yeah.
Not a problem. And I think that child really said it all.
Yeah, it's too bad. So that the process continued
Yeah.
in a way. Gladys became an administrator, and we assigned another supervisor to it. I can't remember who it was.
I think
But somebody Balderas before Cecilia Sacco.
No, it was Belia. Belia Garay was the
Belia
supervisor.
Garay, that's right, Belia Garay.
She was actually the first supervisor because Tony was involved.
Tony was involved.
And Laura,
Yeah,
I don't
that's a
remember
different-
the last
yeah,
name,
different.
was involved, but we were not really fully.
Laura Mansour.
Laura
There were two
Mansour was
social workers.
actually, she's the one who started the unit. We then moved toward centralizing all these children in one unit and began the process of reaching out to other offices, because up to now we were really mostly in our
Belvedere.
Belvedere office. So then we started to other offices within the department and began the process of identifying children who met that criteria, and then transferring the case to this special unit, who will have have the contact with immigration, because by then we had someone who had given us a contact in
Yeah,
immigration.
immigration was very,
They really
was
were
very positive.
Yeah, they were very receptive.
We even gave them a plaque
Right.
because they cooperated so much.
Yeah,
But they
yeah.
assigned and they told
Assigned
us
one person to work with this.
because what we
Yeah.
had to do, the process on that end was
Yeah.
that we would take our case paperwork and then we would send someone to look through the immigration files that they had. It's not as good as it is now, but it was computerized, and see if we could locate parents here.
Yeah.
But if you look at something like Maria Garcia, there's probably half a
Yes.
million of them.
Maria Garcia, yes.
Half a million of Maria Garcias all over the. So that was impossible. But we needed to tell the judge, no different than going to another state or even going to the Indian reservations under the Child Welfare Act. We had to tell the judge, we've looked and we can't find.
Yeah.
The due diligence search that was mandated by law. So, I mean, they assigned somebody and we had access to all those immigration files to the point where our worker could walk in, Eva, could walk in, oh, hi, how are you, and go,
And go through
and they'd
the
leave her alone.
Right.
They didn't,
immigration files.
yeah, they
Yes.
didn't care. I mean, I didn't say they didn't care.
No, they trusted. Yes,
They
it's not that
trusted
they
it.
didn't
Yeah,
care.
they
They
trusted
trusted.
us to-
Yes, they
to
knew
do
that
this.
we were there just, with an emphasis of
And
trying
for very
to.
limited,
Yeah,
for very
and-
limited.
and they trust that. And actually, that was our role. We didn't really
yeah.
overstep our boundaries ever. We tried to, because for us it was very important to keep this going.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to mess it up. We didn't want anybody to go and.
And we
create-
maintained the relationship with the
relationship.
Mexican authorities,
Mhm.
especially the movers like from Guadalajara and Tijuana, because in Mexicali,
That's right.
Mexicali, because and we went down there again. Remember, we presented them with
Right.
some certificates from the county, for their cooperation and all that, and we were treated very well. And
It was amazing.
Yeah,
As I
it-
think back,
it was good. It was
and I
very-
said, boy, we shipped all this. There was no extra money.
no money. The county didn't spend
No
any money.
money.
We were getting paid
We were
anyway.
doing our work.
We got mileage like
My
anybody else.
cases, I still had a caseload. I did my
Yeah,
caseload
yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
It was, as I look back and I said, boy, I can't imagine how we did all of this, but we did it. And everybody else who was involved, to this day, the person who are still involved in that project, they're very committed to do it. And actually, I want to say it was not only with Latin American country, it became for the entire work. We had
Now we have.
cases from
Now we
England
have.
and other countries who are also here.
We have a
it's
there's a protocol now for
Yes.
Yeah.
international return or
Yes.
something like that.
I mean, it continued to evolve as the need.
I was involved
came
in
up.
one a couple of years ago
Yeah.
in which I was just asked to consult where was a Muslim father came
Oh, I
looking,
remember that case.
came
Yes.
looking for his son.
Yes.
And the mother didn't want to let go, and then
Yes.
there was a big to-do, and the INS and the FBI got involved, the State Department got involved.
Yes.
But there was a protocol to, then went to court, and the judge decided that the child should stay, But it was, but they used it was DCFS.
It was DCFS now,
protocols and staff to do a lot of the groundwork and presentation.
I know, Carlos, in some of our past conversations, you've talked about the involvement of the federal government. They actually did become involved at one point.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that? When did they get involved and how did that happen?
Well, it wasn't going to be, aside from immigration, Health and Human Services in Washington wasn't interested. They weren't interested in this. And they had some concerns. The administration, especially President Reagan's administration, some concerns that, because immigration has always been in there, that this was going to be, if we let this group in or legalize them, that we would be obligated to legalize their families, and it would be a flood, and all this stuff. But none of that was true, because these were children who had no
No
parents,
family.
no parents. That was the bottom line. So they weren't giving us any suggestions or anything. Plus, they also saw it as this is an INS issue, the Justice Department issue. It wasn't a Health and Human Services issue. So it wasn't. Let's see. There was the IRCA, Immigration Control and Reform Act in '86 came and legalized a lot of families, and then in 1990 there was a leftover, the Immigration Control Reform Act 2. And so at that time, the county oftentimes needs money, you know. So looking at the GRI files, we saw, hey, you know, there's a lot of kids now. You know, a lot of kids that are eating up county funds. Why don't we go back and find at that time I was a bureau director, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, over child protection.
Yeah.
So what we did then, when we said, how can we get them into this immigration reform? And Judge Louis, I know you remember, he was the interim director.
Yeah.
Said, hey, that's a good idea. So we talked to the county council, and who didn't offer a whole lot of help, but Steve Fox said, you know, we could do it under this clause in the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which had been in the books for years, but it was going to be updated. It was called Special Immigrant Status. And this is the section in the Immigration Code that allows religious figures like priests and nuns to come, and for so many years. It's how industry recruits, or was it that they're recruiting engineers, doctors,
or other professionals.
You know, other professionals that are needed for the benefit of the United States. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the section. So they said, let's put it in there. Let's see if we can get it in there. So we came up with the language, 2 sentences. Okay. When a state court determines that a child is not to be returned to their home of origin or to their family of origin, immigration naturalization, this act allows for, or shall permit, I think it shall permit, the legalization of that minor. That's it. You know, I call it the Carlos Sosa clause, but I'm the only one.
I think that's rightfully so.
So
Should be called Carlos Sosa.
So how do we get it? You know, how do we get this thing then? Well, I don't know if you will recall, but the Jones and Day is a legal firm in Washington that does a lot of the legal work for the county and lobby work in Washington. So Judge Louis, being a judge, you know, talked to them, and they said, yeah, well, you know, we'll carry the ball. But what's the strategy? Well, the strategy was to meet with INS, with Immigration Naturalization Service, because we said, we want you guys on our side. Because, you know, and then we went back to that. You don't want to be in the Times. We gave them another soft threat, them looking inhumanitarian. And, this is what we need. And so they, you know, righteously, that's their bailiwick. You know, well, how many people are we talking about? And give me some stats. So we got back here and I worked up some stats. We had about 200 children at the most at the time here in LA County, and we had the vast number of kids. Arizona and Texas had the next biggest bunch of kids. And what was happening was that in El Paso, what they wanted us to show that how's the rest of the country doing it. So I said, well, let's concentrate on the Southwest, because that's the biggest immigration. You know, who had it. Well, I talked to El Paso, the Texas Child Welfare Agency in El Paso, and said, how do you deal with these? Well, they had a personal relationship with the Mexican authorities across the river in Juarez, so they just took the kids and left them. That was their talk to the Mexicali people, and they said, well, we'll call and they'll come and pick them up. That's it. And San Diego had a personal relation. It was all person-to-person kind of stuff. No real protocols except us. And San Diego would return the children to Tijuana. So it's okay. So I wrote that up for INS, and so they could hang their hat on, you know, the original system. And whatever immigration has, it doesn't work because it doesn't fit this population. So the intent then was for INS to not oppose this particular move, to be included in the Reform Act. And I would be representing the National Association of Child Welfare Agencies, NAVCO, and I would testify before the Ways and Means Committee in Washington. So I did. I mean, I presented, and they were very, I talked, I mean, a cult, you gotta sell it, so I did about these children, abused children. These are not delinquents. These are not, I'll tell you about delinquents in a minute. These were not delinquents. These were victims of our society. And how can we abandon them and send them? Very sympathetic.
But it was true.
That was true. Yeah, it was true. And they
yeah.
recognized that, And, of course, I came after somebody who spoke about the National Restaurant Association or something, who wanted legalization of the undocumented because they were short of kitchen staff. I swear, that's what they were looking at. We were short of kitchen staff,
Well, we can become these children citizens, and then they can go and work and train as cook.
So we had, so then, they asked me how many kids. They asked me some, it was very easy, And I think the Jones and Data law firm had also probably spoken to a couple of the panel, the Senate panel, about this particular thing. And, oh, thank you very much. Oh, you're doing great work. And then it came out. It published.
But from what I've heard, it was a very emotional presentation, and that the senators were extremely moved by your presentation.
Yeah.
I am sure that it was.
Yeah, it was very.
Yes.
I talked about the victims, that I said, how would you?
You really did a great job, and it came from the heart. I think that.
Well, yeah, and I knew it well.
And you knew it well. You have been
well.
involved from the beginning as a social worker and then as an administrator, and you really had your heart on it, Carlos. That comes true.
So it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
It was very good.
And so,
So it got in the
your
books.
measure passed?
Passed. It's on the books. So then we came back and said, okay, let's look at all those children that are in permanency planning. Oh, the other issue was that federal law, 96272, Child Welfare Act, talked about permanency and protection, but it did not say only for this kind of child and not the other. And neither did the states. None of the states had. So part of my presentation was you cannot have a two-tier system in which we'll protect these children but not these children. That doesn't make sense. So I sold them. I sold them
But
that
it was
one.
true.
Yeah, it was true. It
Yeah,
was true. So
It didn't say these children are not supposed to be protected
Yeah.
or given permanency status at some point in their life. I mean, that's what we do as workers.
And, I'm sure behind the scenes there were other State Department, were sort of looking at this because the relationship with Mexico, that we were dumping their kids over across the border. I mean, that never came out, but I teach policy here, so I'm aware. But
I think the meetings with Mexico were very productive, and I think it helped.
Oh, sure.
It was tremendous help to do that, and
we had told them about the cooperation. We said that cooperation. So when we got back, we said we can save the county money. So the county said, great. So they gave us staff. They gave us 2 staff and a clerk to go through the permanency planning cases in which the child had, met the criteria of the immigrant status. And then we also had a name now for our unit, Special Immigrant.
Special Immigrant Status Unit.
Yeah, that's good. So we had 3 staffers, 3 CSWs, who processed, wrote the court orders. We told us that the social worker will write them for you. Ran them to the court when their hearings came up, got an approval. So the first year we saved the county about $7 million, just the first year.
By changing the status.
The status
of the child.
That's right. By changing the status to a legal immigrant, now they could claim federal participation. But they were happy.
That's-
CAO was
That's
happy.
the county happiness.
Yeah.
The social work happiness. Now we have a plan for this child.
Yeah.
When we finish, kid can go on with the life. So there's both. I think were important, but for the county, the saving the money for the workers who were involved in the project was the fact that
Yeah,
Yeah.
it weighed very heavily
Yeah.
on social workers to have a child say, what's going to happen to me?
yeah.
Or the foster parents saying, what's going to happen to me? The problem came
Yeah.
after we processed all this. Not the problem. The concern came that there were a lot of and a lot of Central America, but Mexican too, runaways had come into the county.
Well,
And,
that developed another project. That you develop another project.
Well, sort of. For the immigration. So what?
No, not for
the
immigration.
Advocacy group, like the Coalition for Humane Immigration and Reform, something, whatever it's called, the CHIRLA. That's good. One of the Class A immigrant groups. Then said, we have a lot of immigrant children, minors, on the boulevard and Pasadena and other places that could qualify for this. So we were very protective, and maybe erroneous, but maybe not, in that we said we cannot sell this or continue to sell it to immigration or to the county itself if any of these are delinquents, because the whole milieu was, why are we legalizing criminals?
Yes.
No different than it is now.
Yes.
Here we are, right? 16 years later to 20 years later, still talking about the same
Right.
issue. Why are we legalizing criminals? So we said, no, the runaways, they don't meet 300 case. They don't meet the spirit of Public Law 96272. So we said no. We got a lot of heat from it, but we stuck to that. And also, we also found that some of these young men, they were almost 90% or more young men, were not minors. They were
Right.
20, 21. So we required then on some a bone scan. Where they do this wrist or hand, right? I think it's a wrist that something bones. At a certain age they fuse or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but on some of these we required that. But we went to visit some of these runaway, undocumented minor shelters in the Westlake area, the Echo Park area. Yeah, I went for
Angel
lunch.
Flights.
Yeah, an
was
Angel's
one.
Flight in Hollywood, and we
Yeah.
met with them. And
I think we tried to do other work with those, but we didn't
Yeah.
want to jeopardize the opportunity for the rest of the
Yeah.
children. I think we felt it was too risky to do
Yeah.
that
So
and lose everything that we had gained.
we told them we'll give you
Yeah.
consultation, we'll give you training,
Yeah.
we'll tell you who our contacts are. You guys have to work it out. You have to work it out with
For a
probation.
separate population.
Yeah. Probation really wasn't that interested in doing anything.
When you mention 300, you're referring to the Welfare and Institutions
I'm
Code
sorry.
300 California law,
Correct.
which
Yes.
identifies or describes, defines the dependent child, the child who's been abused or neglected.
Correct.
So you restricted the activity to that population.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yes.
And
So there was focus, there was
Yes.
purpose, and specificity
Yes.
in the action that you were able to achieve.
and it allowed us to track. We had actual court numbers and case numbers, so we could track how many we were doing, where they went, and that kind of thing. And they were in foster care, so they tended to be a lot more stable than the runaways. The runaways were young men, and they wanted to work. I mean, they came here to work, and some came here from El Salvador to get away from the army or the guerrilla war, but a lot of them came to work and they wanted jobs, and and I understood that. I mean, they're in Mexico or other. They were young men who were in the workforce. Culturally, they were in the workforce already. So we stayed away from that. And like I said, we caught a lot of flack, but
Well, it's,
Gladys,
Yeah.
couldn't do it all.
as the person involved in the implementation, were there specific issues that you faced, or unusual things as you think back about it?
As I think, no, it went very smooth. I think because I worked directly under Carlos and the guidelines he gave me, we just went on. I mean, if I think back and look at today's, if we could do that today, probably today would have been much more difficult, I think, because of, I don't know, it got complicated, the policies, and I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I perceive it. But at that time, I think the difficulties, if they were there, I didn't see it. I saw like, we got to do this, and we always found a way to do it. So it was the motivation, perhaps, to do it, the belief.
It always seemed to me as if that period of time in the development of child welfare in LA County, there was an extreme flexibility and promotion of creativity.
Yes,
Yes.
I would agree
And
with
the
you.
creativity
Yes.
was allowed to flourish without a great deal of limitation.
Exactly.
Correct.
You put it
Yeah.
right where it is. Yes.
Yeah. Even if you,
Yes.
historically, we created,
Yeah.
well, you know, the child sexual abuse units that you had, and the Class L, you know, we created those at that time in the late 70s,
Yes.
mid-70s, we created those. In the 80s, we created the Runaway unit in Hollywood.
Yes.
But it even started with the Skid Row project, remember?
Oh, and then,
There
then
was
we did a
Skid Row
Skid Row
project that also had to
Yes.
do with immigration and the
Yes.
families who
Yeah.
were living downtown.
Yeah, we did a little bit of research and
Yes.
and found out there were a lot of kids in Skid Row, but they were invisible
Yes.
to the
Yeah.
public. So we just, you know,
Yeah.
we looked at that and said, you know, we need a different way of, that came under your administration, yeah.
Yeah, I had that too.
We need a
and I was a
different-
supervisor there too.
Yeah, we need a different way of looking at
This family and what the needs are.
And,
Yeah,
and that
at
was
least.
allowed to occur.
And
Yeah.
that was allowed
Absolutely,
to occur. Yes.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes. And then we partnered with Para Los Niños, which opened
Yes.
the doors at that point.
Yes.
And
And then we started centralizing, you know, we
happened, yeah.
centralized, in the late 80s, we centralized the hotline and the command post, you know, and that was allowed also, you know, to flourish. It's great like it is now.
And the Skid Row project, Carlos, I don't know if you remember, but even
Oh,
before
I-
the Runaway project, part of the Skid Row project had to do with a lot of teenagers who were coming to Hollywood from other states because Hollywood was
Yeah,
something
Hollywood.
that they wanted to see. And so a lot ended up on the street, and the Skid Row project will work with them and return them back to the family wherever they came from. We pay for the
They pay for their
airfare.
airfare.
The airfare, we will work with the, same as we will work with Mexico, we work with the agencies in other states to return that child, make sure that the kid home was safe, that it was okay. Because they were coming just, you know, they were teenagers and they wanted to know what Hollywood is all about, what is all this.
Well,
that
we
idea.
would get.
So that was also another project in the
within
70s.
the 70s.
In the 70s.
And in the 70s, also in the early 80s, we got a lot of projects, I mean, a lot of, you know, from the other states.
Yeah.
Runaway, you know, the runaway issues came, and the awareness of runaway problems in the late 70s, early 80s, and young kids would, wanderlust, whatever you want to call it, would come to California and would come and then find themselves without any money, without any place to stay, or they were exploited and abused on the boulevard, and you know, then Travelers Aid would call us, right? Travelers Aid would call and say, "Gee, we have this kid. You guys, you could send them back," because they didn't have the money. So again, but we didn't just send them back. We did a home study, and we requested the other states to keep an eye on them and things like that.
And I think we began the process of working very closely with agencies in particular in the Skid Row area.
That's a good point, that
Yeah.
that actually in the late 70s and the 80s, we were more willing to work with other
Yes,
agencies.
that was the beginning
A
of,
lot more.
right.
And this was a new concept. this
That was a new
collaboration.
concept,
You
yes.
talked to other people, unlike
Right.
yourself. They didn't have to be
Exactly.
social workers.
Yes.
If you were to share information with social workers of today, from these experiences that you had, what lesson, what advice, what suggestions might you make to the next generation of social workers?
Well, I think that social workers, and I try to convey this to my students, is they have to be more enterprising, more, and at the same time a little bit more, have a little bit more audacity to challenge or to move towards establishing, you know, instead of saying, well, the bosses don't want it,
Yes.
to understand that the bosses are bosses. I mean, they're people too, and maybe they're ex-social workers as well, and they can't think of everything. But they, the first line social workers, are the ones who really know what's working and what's not working, and they should be willing to push for it. You know, it's some of the offices or agencies are very proactive, or they're always looking for some new way of doing things, you know, and not just money, but rather they have these concepts and they have these if you look at I think you were involved in the forensic interviewing of sexually abused children, you know, that took a lot of thinking about how to approach it, and the mirrors and what did it do, and, you know, from a social work perspective, what was the detriment, what would be the, you know, the detriment to the child if we interviewed them through the window, and, you know, the police and all that stuff. The parents also were going to hear things they didn't know about, and it happened, you know, when the child says, well, my uncle did me too, not just my dad. Well, you know, oh wow, but now the social worker's got another problem on his hands, and that has to be worked through. But a lot of those kinds of movements, you know, you got to be, and the reason I say audacious is because you got to push the system. The system, everybody gets comfortable, and we think it's always money, but it isn't. You know, it isn't always money. Sometimes let's use the money differently to do this. Yeah.
I agree with Carlos. It's not the money. I think it goes beyond that. And I think for the worker, what I will tell them is look at themselves. What would they like for themselves? Are they willing to do? And basically, if they go for that, they need to look at the child as can we do for this child that would be different? What would make a change in this? Because I think we look at safety, and that's our first goal, but it's beyond safety.
Yeah.
I want you to hear that it is beyond safety, it's beyond that. It's what's that child going to be when they grow up? What's going to be like? How are they going to parent? What are they going to do? And that's the end. And you need to look for that answer, and it is there.
And sometimes we save them in a crisis situation, but
Right.
we don't save them from after a post.
And that is the key.
From post
Exactly.
crisis or post.
I think you save it from this situation, but that's
Yeah,
just
it's
the
not
beginning
enough,
of that process.
Yeah, I think my philosophy. I got to tell you, Esther. My philosophy was always, in the absence of no, it's a yes. I'm serious.
It's true.
That was in the absence of nobody told me no, then I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And because I found that it was easier to later say I'm sorry than it is to get permission to do something, you know. And I think that I wasn't doing anything that was in any of this with the immigration issue to put the county in jeopardy of anything. We never got sued. We never right over this issue.
No.
You know, it was it made the county look good. Made the county look good. Yeah.
But it reflected your understanding of the limits of your organization,
Correct.
the rules and the regulations,
Right.
Of my organization.
and you operated within that.
Right.
Yeah, and within the law.
And where it needed to be expanded, requiring testimony in Washington, you did it. And had the support of your organization to do that. And as the supervisor of that group, Gladys, you made it work.
It had to work. It was good. It was a good
It was a
idea.
good
it was
follow
just,
through.
yeah,
it was a good
just,
follow through that we had to do.
I think when you believe that something is good, you just follow through to the end. And I think that's what we did. We knew it was going to be, this was good for the kids, this was good for the county, it was good for everyone. So It happened.
The upshot is that the unit's still there.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, and they have a supervisor that was very passionate.
Oh, yes.
And there may
with
be-
the same
yeah,
passion still. Which
And
is-
she's looking
yeah.
at other elements that come to our attention, which the system, the child has ignored,
Yeah.
that the human trafficking.
The human trafficking.
And that may
yes.
be the next
That's what she's
evolution.
involved now. Yeah.
Yeah, that may be the next evolution of this whole thing of dealing with immigrant children.
Yes, Cecilia
We weren't-
Sacco is now
yeah.
the supervisor, and she's so involved
With human trafficking.
with human
she's
trafficking now, and
has a passion
still,
for it.
yes, with the SIS unit. I mean, she still works on that, very passionate, and so this is something that have not died, and it will not die.
But again, it came to her attention that some of the kids she got
Right.
had been trafficked.
Exactly.
So that it raises her consciousness and awareness of, hey, there's still another
But
group out there that we
See,
don't
that's
know
the idea.
about.
And something comes up that maybe no one else has the opportunity to see it.
Mhm.
And then Cecilia, instead of saying, oh, well, I don't want to deal with this because this is not something that I need to get involved, she said, you know what, let me look at this issue. What can we do to improve this? What do we need? How do we can get involved? That's the change in the social worker. That's what you need to do. If something comes up, don't bury it. Say, let me look at this.
That's right.
What can be done?
And now it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
With the internet and all the different programs, boy, it's a lot easier. When we did the Skid Row unit, myself and a community worker went around, spent 3 days going around in Skid Row and talking to the kids and going up and down these horrible hotels and we took some pictures and because we didn't understand it, but we knew there were kids there because we had gotten kids into the system from Skid Row, but they were always from the police.
And I remember people telling me, are you going to work in the Skid Row?
Who was
What are you
telling you?
going to do? Other people,
Oh, yeah.
other people. What are you going, when I became a supervisor,
Yeah.
and I said, why not? Well, because that's an area that people don't go. And I said, well, the people live in there, so
A
we
lot
need to
of
go. And a lot of families live there.
Yeah.
And nothing ever happened. We don't have one incident that anything happened to the workers who
Yeah,
work in the
right,
Skid Row.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
sounds as if the Skid Row project is one that we need to capture information about too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a
As a matter of fact,
very
I
exciting project.
I still may even have the original proposal.
Yes,
That, that we worked up on that,
because that was really another
Yeah.
exciting project, and
yeah.
that people who work there also were
And it was the same,
very committed to
You-
help the family.
yeah, and what I found was that, something you mentioned
Carlos,
about
and what
bringing-
was your worker? Gloria. Was it
Gloria
Gloria?
Garcia.
Gloria
yeah.
Garcia.
I saw her, she's my neighbor.
Yeah, Gloria Garcia.
She was a community worker who had a passion.
Yeah.
Nothing scared her. Nothing scared her. I was going to say, here, we weren't asking for different, there was the same population in a different milieu. That's how, they were abused kids, abandoned kids. We'd go up and we'd see these doors that had a padlock outside. The door was padlocked outside, but there were children in there, And sometimes they would open the door a little bit and, how old are you? Well, I'm 6 or 7. And how old is your little brother who was crying? Well, he's 1. How do you get a 6-year-old, 7-year-old taking care of a 1-year-old? I mean, this is nonsense where we didn't have any additional resources, but we could coordinate what there was. And that's what we did.
You rethink how you approach the situation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes. Sometimes we forget, and
Right.
the drive of a bureaucracy is to remain status quo.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I hear you describing is, it's so much more effective when the status quo is always challenged, and new needs are identified, and resources are reallocated in a way that meets the current need.
Yeah.
This is a changing world, and the needs are going to change.
Yeah.
And when the needs change, you have to think how you're going to meet that need.
Yeah.
Well,
And basically
if you
that's-
have the resources, then use them differently because,
Right. And
because the
yes,
needs change.
Exactly.
And I think that's with the trafficking, I think we'll do something,
Yeah.
hopefully, I think it'll evolve into something differently in the child welfare and research. I think that there needs to be more research. We don't understand a lot of the nuances or the trafficking system because it's always been a law enforcement issue. But once the law enforcement does their thing, you end up with children.
Right.
And you end up with young adults who, who have needs. The law enforcement chapter is closed, but we have other issues here that that need to be addressed, and and hopefully I think that'll be the next evolution. We even had at one point, and correct me if I'm rambling on to a lot of things. There was a ship that ran aground in 92 or 93, ran aground right up near San Diego, Oceanside. It's a container ship from China. And it floundered in the water, and it rescued by the Coast Guard, and they opened one of the containers, and there was all these smuggled, Chinese. Yeah, a whole mess of them. There's been like 100 and something in there. And they were glad they were rescued because they were in this container. Some of them were minors. And some of them said they were minors because they had been told, tell me you're a minor, you get treated differently. And some of them had a phone number and they would call. And then here comes, uncle. We had no way of verifying it was uncle. That could have been the receiver, from the system, the end receiver. We didn't know who he was, and the DCFS didn't get involved except with a very few, very young ones that really look young. But we still didn't understand the system. They had taken care of this ship and that incident, that human trafficking incident, but it didn't go anywhere. We haven't learned anything about that stuff, and so that's what got me thinking about.
So our experiences of the immigrant children in the 70s, 80s gives us a foundation for looking at some of these new issues.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And maybe even
That's a good way of putting
template
it.
for action that would be modified, given that it's now 30, 40 years later, but that we know how to address some of these new issues.
Yeah.
And we know that it will be challenging, but that it takes commitment, it takes focus, and it takes, it's complex. It's not a single professional issue. Social workers don't resolve these issues alone.
No.
They involve
That's
the
all
INS,
true.
law enforcement, the courts, and it's complicated.
Yes.
But social workers have tools already, For a lot of these trafficked families or young women or minors, you still got to do an assessment. You still got to interview. You still have to listen to the story. You still have to look for any mental health issues. Those things don't go away. And I hope social workers don't say, well, I don't know how to deal with it. Well, you know how to deal with some aspects of it.
Yes.
Because you've been taught to interview. You've been taught to come up with a case plan. You've been taught to get resources. Yeah, but, they're not dummies into brand new situation. They have skills.
Of course they do. It's like, the carpenter, they have all the tools they need, and they maybe ask him to do a new building, and they said, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do that. But they have it right there. All they have to think is how I'm going to get around. Same with social workers.
How am I going to build it?
They have the skill.
Whether I can build it.
Yes, they have the skill, and they can get around the problem if they use those skills. They might not have used it before in that circumstances, but they can apply what they know.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us today. It's been very, very informative. It's a remarkable history that you've shared with us, a remarkable history that you've lived. So I thank you very much. And
well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'm glad that we didn't lose this aspect of history.
Actually, I'm thank you, because I have somehow, put that away out of my life. And then when you call, and I thought, oh my God, and I started thinking, I said, wow, we have come a long way, baby.
And we did a lot of things. We did a lot of
we
things.
did a lot of things that you don't even see it at the time. And it's when you reflect upon them, you said, oh wow, this is what it was.
We need to have a class in social work world where social workers are not so modest about their accomplishments. Our profession is so modest. you know.
Well, I would not have changed what I did. for
No,
anything.
no.
It's
But-
just,
But you know, you're
No,
when you were in your unit and you would have, I'm sure their husbands or your husband. Well, what did you do today? Although you had replaced kids and you protected them and you went to court and all that. Oh, I just had a lot of work.
it's true.
And that was the end of a whole day of being to court or being yelled at or by the family or
Saving
whatever.
children.
You know. Oh, I just
It's dynamic of knowing that you're part of this world and you're helping someone. I don't think that can be changed.
No.
That's just,
Mm.
that's what you do. You are a facilitator, basically. Yeah.
Well,
Thank
you again.
Oh well, thank you again, Esther. Thank you.
Thank
and
you
thank you for
taking us back on a,
our videographer.
on a trip.
Thank you, our
40 years
videographer.
later. My God, Carlos. We don't look that old, by the way.
No, you're right. We don't look that old. Yeah, they're too young, huh, Gladys?
We still have a long way to go.